Good afternoon, or morning, wherever you are, and welcome to this webinar organised by Resilience First. I'm Robert Hall, the Executive Director of Resilience First. For those of you who were unable to view the opening video, Resilience First's mission is to help build resilience across business communities, whether those communities be defined by geography or special interest. Please do visit our website, resiliencefirst.co.uk, to see the many projects and events we organise in an effort to help your understanding and application of resilience. Today, I'm pleased to introduce this webinar on the important theme of agility. Someone asked me the other day if this was about how fast you can run away from a problem, and I said not really, and offered a rather more nuanced interpretation provided by an American businesswoman who once said that agility is fundamental to leading a team through times of change. Organizations like to think of themselves as agile, but rarely spend time analyzing what it actually means, and more importantly, how they can achieve it. With so much change taking place in the world today, COVID and climate being just two, it's timely that we look at agility and what good guidance is out there to help us navigate our way. To lead us on that journey, I'm delighted to welcome four people who know a lot more than most about what makes an agile organization. The conversation will be based around an agile working guide that McKinsey has compiled with Resilience First. And some of our speakers today have kindly contributed to that guide. The guide follows work we did last year, the output of which can be found on our website. So to lead us through the proceedings today, I would like to introduce the chairman of Resilience First, who, as former chairman of KPMG, is well qualified to identify agility in an organization. Simon Collins will offer some opening remarks by way of scene setting, and will then introduce our other speakers today. Throughout the session, I would encourage all listening to ask questions of the speakers by posting brief questions in the chat box to the right of your screen. I'm sure the chair will pick up as many of those questions as he can in the Q&A session towards the end. Simon, the virtual floor is yours.
Robert, thank you, and hello everyone. Let me add my welcome to that of Robert. Improving agility sounds good to me anytime, but I think all of us feel that COVID and some of the lessons from it has made agility in all of our organizations, and actually I suppose lives as well, a real imperative. So it's really timely that we're doing this webinar, I think, and let me add my thanks to McKinsey for partnering with Resilience First and shouldering the development of the guide, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what all of our panel have to say. A couple of personal observations or reflections around agility. First of all, I think it's telling that there's, back to Robert's point, no real single coherent definition of agility. Everyone's got their own themes around it, but it's banded around as if there is. And I think today it'd be really helpful to see what emerges as a sort of current of best practice or definition around it. The second thing is, I think we all know that agility helps us sort of defend against or avoid or manage crises, and I think that's been its conventional sort of meaning to most of us. I think though it's really important when we're talking about agility to see it as something that can build strength, something that can build a real competitive advantage. Agility is not just a defensive thing for organizations. So I'm really pleased that today's session will include quite a lot of proactive sort of value-adding things that we can all take away and do. I think the other thing is that I've learned over the years as a leader and a crisis practitioner as well, that agility and building agility is not about a drill or a series of fixed measures in any way. It's much more akin to transforming or growing an organizational muscle. It's much more cultural in organizations, how resilience is built. So I'm absolutely fascinated to see how our panelists reflect on training that muscle, on the culture of resilience as well. I hope you all find the session practical as well as interesting. Well, we are privileged to have a great panel, and let me start just by introducing them briefly. So first off will be Christopher Hanscom, who's a partner in McKinsey in London. Christopher will be followed by Caroline Field, who, as well as being an academic, is a partner at Arup and the Resilience Shift. And finally, but by no means least, Basil Scarcella, who is Chief Exec Officer of UK Power Networks, who worries greatly when it's snowing. So doubly grateful to have you with us today, Basil. As Robert said, this will come alive. We'll leave as much time as we can for Q&A with the panelists at the end. So please do submit questions via the chat room. And with no further ado, let's get going. And let me hand over to Christopher.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Simon. So I'm going to say a few words to give a bit of an introduction overview of some of the concepts in the guide that Robert and Simon mentioned. And if we can go over to the slides, then we can get started on those. So I think, as we're all very aware, organizations today are facing many challenges. The external environment is ever changing, even more so in the time of COVID. Technology introduction continues apace. Digitalization and democratization of data is accelerating. Indeed, many industries have seen a decade's worth of digital progress in just the past year during the pandemic. And finally, many organizations are facing a new war for talent, or put another way, an imperative to reskill and re-equip workers for the future. So we believe it's time for a different type of organization, moving away from an organization as a machine type thinking of a previous age towards a more organic, a self-organizing, agile organization to win today. And I think you put this perfectly. Agility is not just around defense. It's really the type of organizational construct required to win and succeed in today's changing environment. So agility brings increasing resilience and adaptive capacity. It also has associated with it reduction of risk through a mindset of testing and learning fast. Agility is about empowering people, moving from talking about things to actually getting things done. And it's also about simplifying how stuff gets done, reducing handovers and bureaucracy. So what does this mean in practice? Well, first and foremost, agility is not a free-for-all. A common misconception when I talk to companies about agility is that somehow stability and scale must be sacrificed for speed and flexibility. And in contrast, a truly agile organization requires both. It requires a stable backbone of culture, process, and platforms, which then enables that dynamic, nimble ecosystem of mission-based teams. And anyone who's experienced working in an agile organization, or even an individual agile team, will know that there's tremendous rigor and structure to ways of working, often actually more so than in many traditional organizations. So a bit more about what we really mean by an agile organization. And we think agile organizations exhibit 5 trademarks. So first and foremost, we talk about a North Star that's really embodied across the organization. Agile organizations have a shared purpose and vision. That's what we mean by this North Star, a shared purpose and vision for the organization that helps all employees feel personally and emotionally invested with the mission. The North Star serves as a reference for customers who choose where to buy. It's also helpful for employees in their day-to-day to actually guide real decisions. And it helps partners choose whether they want to work with their company and the organization. Next, we talk about a network of cross-functional empowered teams. Agile organizations maintain a relatively stable top-level structure, but replace much of the remaining traditional hierarchy with a flexible and scalable network of teams. Networks are a natural way to organize efforts because they balance individual freedom with collective coordination. And many traditional organizations have experienced the power of these dynamic teams, these dynamic networks, evolving somewhat organically over the past year whilst responding to COVID. Next, we talk about rapid decision and learning cycles. Agile organizations work in these rapid cycles of thinking, of doing, and then learning. And these are cycles that are closely aligned with their processes for creativity and core business. This rapid cycle way of working can be applied at all levels of the organization. From the team level, where agile organizations radically rethink the working model of teams, all the way through to the enterprise level, where it can change how budgets are set, for example. Fourthly, a dynamic people model that ignites passion. An agile organization culture puts people truly at the center, and it seeks to engage and empower everyone across the organization. Organizations that have done this well have invested in leadership, which empowers and develops its people, also investing in a strong community, which supports and grows the culture. And finally, the underlying people processes that reinforce all of what they're trying to achieve. And then the fifth trademark, next generation enabling technology. For many organizations, such radical rethinking of how the organization looks that I just described requires a rethinking of the technologies that underpin and enable the products and processes, as well as the technology practices needed to support speed and flexibility. So these are the 5 trademarks that we see in different forms, but recurring in all truly agile organizations. But what about impact? So we consistently see agile organizations outperforming their peers. The examples shown on this page come from some research last year, where we looked across, first of all, detailed interviews with 22 companies, and then a broader survey across well over 200 companies to look at the impact that they achieved through their agile transformations. We tracked a broad set of outcome metrics during the agile transformations, and they can be broadly grouped into these 4 categories around employee engagement, customer engagement, operational performance, and financial performance. And the amazing thing, actually in contrast to many other types of transformation, is that companies consistently saw really material improvement across multiple of these different dimensions, not just one, but several dimensions. For employees working in small teams with clear missions and empowered to deliver, we saw typically a 20 to 30 point improvement in employee engagement measures. The customer centricity at the core of an agile organization was time and again seen to translate to customer outcomes, with 10 to 30 point improvement seen in customer engagement metrics like NPS. Operational performance often took a step change, and precise metrics obviously varied by industry, but in general, speed, target achievement, and predictability were seen to improve by 30 and sometimes even up to 50%. And then finally, all of this translated into improved financial performance. And when we spoke to companies, they would say and estimate that financial performance typically improved 20 to 30% following their agile transformation. So finally, conscious of COVID times, I'd like to share just some of the research that we did looking at agile organizations during the crisis. And we found, in summary, that agile organizations both adjusted faster and with less employee turmoil than their traditional counterparts. Given what I've already said about agility, this should probably not be a surprising result. Agile companies had the edge during the pandemic because they already had the processes and structures available to them that proved critical to adapting to changing priorities. So looking at this in a little more detail, the chart on this page, this is showing some research looking at telco players during the COVID-19 outbreak. We looked at how long it took them from the first infections in their country last year until they launched the first COVID-specific product or services. And we found that telco operators with higher agile maturity responded faster than their competitors. And in fact, those with the highest agile maturity were twice as fast to release new products or services than their non-agile competitors. We found the same when we did similar research looking at banks and financial products released following COVID outbreaks in the countries. We also interestingly found the same within companies. So agile units within companies which had gone through a transition were better performing and better able to cope with the switch to remote working than non-agile units in those same companies. So I think this is maybe a good point to bridge to Caroline, who's going to share some more stories from agile organizations, bring this to life a little bit more.
Brilliant. Thank you, Christopher. So as Christopher said, my name's Caroline Field and I'm an Associate Director at Arup, and so I lead on organisational resilience. So I'm going to talk a bit about that and a bit about agility and adaptive capacity. Next slide, please. Thank you. So just as by way of intro, I think Chris was given a great intro, and obviously we've been going through COVID for the last year, but we've seen ourselves probably over the last decade or so experiencing greater sort of volatility, uncertainty, complexity and ambiguity, so the VUCA environment. And so this has really driven this kind of focus on resilience and agility. And so next slide, please. When I think about resilience, I tend to try and think about it in sort of two chunks, really. So there's the piece as Simon mentioned, your defensive piece around sort of risk mitigation and understanding what's coming at you and trying to avoid that. And then there's a piece around sort of adaptive capacity, being able to spot those opportunities, being able to avoid those threats, being able to be agile as an organization. And so I'm sort of focusing on the agility and the adaptive capacity piece today. And so we've taken a look at adaptive capacity, and it really is this piece that's key to competitive advantage, and it's the capacity of people, processes, assets and technologies to adapt to change. And so very similar to what Christopher just presented, you can see very much these agile pieces playing in here. So if we look from the top, we're looking at essentially a vision and values, and again, having a very clear vision and being aligned within the organization around that is incredibly important. We've seen that. How you've structured your organization, the sort of hierarchy or lack of hierarchy, and whether people feel empowered within the organization. Leadership, incredibly important. So obviously that leadership in terms of that style, whether you're developing leaders at every level and empowering people to make decisions, and what's your decision-making structure. Situational awareness and foresight is about having the right data to make good decisions. So are you gathering the right pieces of information? Are you then able to make those decisions? Are you looking far enough ahead so you can see what's coming at you? And then obviously collaboration, resilience is always lost in the silos. Same with agility and adaptive capacity. So very much, this is very much a focus. Health and well-being, if your staff isn't healthy and happy, none of this works. So a key component. And then how you manage change and how you communicate as an organization is very important. And the way that you kind of manage knowledge and learning. So it's really important to have that reflective part in your business in terms of that ability to reflect, learn and capture those lessons and then do it better next time. And you'll see in my slides in a moment that that doesn't always happen. Technology and innovation, as Christopher mentioned, very, very key as well in terms of how you harness technology for data, but also innovation within your organization. And then lastly, it's not all on the hoof. You do need some plans and testing, and obviously the best kind of response is when you've done that. And so people knowing what their roles and responsibilities are and how they need to respond when something happens, and how they need to kind of, how everything needs to work smoothly. So those are kind of the key aspects that we've looked at in terms of adaptive capacity. And so we've actually, we did some work with Resilience First a number of years ago, where we looked at the agility of airports, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Next slide, please, Robert. So just to kind of bring this sort of together, so we've got a whole tool and process that we've pulled together. So essentially, we look at three aspects. So we look at essentially a staff survey, some qualitative data in terms of how the organisation is doing around these 10 different areas. We look at performance outcomes. So we've looked at, quite interesting actually, we're looking at productivity, also how the amount of revenue that's allocated to resilience. We look at performance of the business against their objectives. So not just, and obviously how often they're disrupted as a business. So some key metrics that we can then start correlating with how resilient and adaptive they are as an organization. And so this is kind of dashboard is showing and pulling together. Next slide, please. Thank you. And so this is really looking at the results from the survey. And so each actually line here is actually answers to a survey. And then the blue is strongly agreeing and the red is strongly disagreeing. And I've actually just sort of condensed these into areas on the left to make it easier to see. And this was looking at UK airports in terms of their agility or adaptive capacity, and looking at some kind of key themes. And so you'll see at the top there, leadership very much came out as an issue in terms of things that they needed to work on. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a second. And very much you can see by that big lump on the right there in terms of the orange and red, it's talking about the alignment of the organization behind that leader. And so getting this alignment and everybody understanding their position, incredibly important. It's something that we saw was not so strong within those airports that we looked at. And communication often comes up as an issue in terms of the healthiness of the communication, and lots of communication via email, and lots of things not communicated that should be communicated. And so that tends to be a key issue that comes up. And I will tell you, this is a pretty typical result in terms of what we're looking at here. So it's not that they're particularly bad on average. I have seen better, and UKPN actually is one that really stood out as being really, really strong in terms of their adaptive capacity. And I'm sure Basil will share that with us in a moment. But you can see on the left here what they were good at. So they were actually very good at collaborating, because when you think about an airport, it is a big community. They do have lots of moving parts and different stakeholders, and so they are pretty good at collaborating. And then also they were quite sort of flexible in terms of their interest in new technologies and bringing those in and using them to enhance the business. And I'll show you a couple of examples in a moment. But what we sort of see a lot across the board is really that those bottom pieces around corporate memory, horizon scanning, situational awareness, and certainly in the airport sector, this sort of lean, which is talking about that they're very focused on efficiency, and it tends to be quite down to the bone in terms of operations, and so it's quite difficult for things to really sort of go off piste if something happens. And so obviously we've seen the very negative impact of COVID on the aviation industry, and over the last 10 years they've had a lot of disruptions due to sort of volcanoes and all those sorts of things. And so there's definitely an issue around diversification for that airport industry. Next slide, please. So just to kind of pick up on some of those points, so essentially we use that tool as a diagnostic to basically prioritize and look at key areas that would benefit from making that improvement around agility and adaptive capacity. And so leadership, obviously, definitely one of the key areas. And I quite like this model, as I think it really speaks to resilient leadership. So talking about leaders having this real clarity of direction, a very strategic intent, unifying purpose and determination. And I'm sure Basil will be reflecting on this, and I know for a fact he's a very strong leader with a very clear clarity of direction. I think what's also really important is this awareness of yourself, awareness of others, but obviously awareness of the business and operating environment around you. And that talks to this situational awareness and getting the information that you need to make good decisions. Leadership presence, so being an authentic leader, being a serving leader, and being very intentional in your actions. And when you're making decisions, being creative, robust, and agile. So I think this is a really good kind of model around leadership. Next. And then horizon scanning, we looked at this again in the aviation sector. So a lot of organizations are not doing enough around horizon scanning. So really looking ahead at sort of scenarios and looking at what's coming at their business. And certainly in terms of the aviation sector, there's a lot of potential kind of disruption sort of between 2030 and 40 with the advent of obviously potentially hydrogen or electric aircraft. You have EVs and potentially automated vehicles coming in, which could potentially disrupt some of their parking models, because a lot of their business models rely on parking. So, and then thinking about that diversification of business models. So we've done some work around what does the future of air travel look like, being able to kind of identify these key themes and put strategies together for airports to look at. Next one, Robert. And then just to pick up on the point around harnessing technology, data and innovation. And so as well as obviously being good for resilience and adaptive capacity, utilising technology and data and information could be good for all aspects of your business. And so it's good from a resilience perspective because it gives you the data about what's going on around you and how you need to respond and, opportunities that you want to capitalise on. But in terms of just your business, that provides the same, doesn't it? I mean, thinking about, we've done some work at all of these airports, so collecting data for kind of insights in terms of business and improving productivity, streamlining operations, enhancing passenger experiences, and reducing costs. So there's really is, a win-win all around when you're kind of harnessing this type of data and technology. I think that's it from me. Just a quick whirlwind through in terms of a few of the projects we've done and a few of the modelling pieces that we've done. And I'm going to hand over to Basil now, who's CEO of UK Power Networks, who's going to talk to us about his leadership around resilience and why UKPN is a very good example in terms of leading the way. Basil.
Hi, thank you, Caroline, and good afternoon, everyone. I should really stop here, given the nice words that Caroline said against UK Power Networks. But we've heard from two experts, both McKinsey's and Arup. You're going to hear from a practitioner. And I was going to say, well done to Resilience First, to Robert and Simon specifically for arranging what is certainly a timely webinar in resilience and agility, given what we're going through. But given the previous two speakers, they're putting me to the test. So I'm under pressure now to see how I stand up to some of the tests that both Caroline and Christopher have actually outlined. As Simon introduced us early on, I'm CEO of UK Power Networks. UK Power Networks is the electricity distribution company in London, the east and southeast of England, and we distribute that. We own the infrastructure, the electricity infrastructure assets, if you like, the poles and wires and substations. We deliver electricity to some 8.2 million customers, both domestic and commercial businesses across our service territory. Arguably, resilience has always been critical to everything we do, whether it's going back a while now, delivering electricity to the Olympic Games in 2012, more topical and more up-to-date, delivering electricity to some 500 hospitals during, at all times, but especially over the last 12 months. We deliver electricity, obviously, to the Houses of Parliament here in London, the City of London, and we respond to storms and also cold and snowy weekends, such as what we've had. So, like I say, arguably resilience and agility to adapt to different environments has always been a strong part. But of our business continuity plans, and I could sit here and say that the business continuity plans are well developed, and we get them independently reviewed by experts such as McKinsey or Arup on a regular basis. But if I sat here and said to you, we tested the scenarios and various scenarios over the years, including the pandemic, to the level that we've been tested the last 12 months, I'll be lying, because I've got to say every time the scenario of a pandemic was discussed, it's all very well to test it on a desktop arrangement, but you can never get to scenario in as real as we've experienced, obviously, over the last 12 months. Having said all of that, however, I see that 2020, it's actually the best year we've ever had, both operationally and from a safety perspective. So I sit here today thinking, without been too in any way complacent, we must be doing something right. But if I then apply what we've done the last 12 months and test it against some of the tests that both Christopher and Caroline have set out, I think it'll give the audience a good round off of how you apply the theory that we've heard from the two previous speakers to sort of like a practitioner, how it happens day to day. Firstly, both speakers focused on a clear vision and strategy. And we at UK Power Networks tend to think we have got a clear vision and a clear strategy. And in short, we aim to be an employer of choice. We aim to be a respected and trusted corporate citizen and sustainably cost efficient. There's no question the first two parts of that vision being an employer of choice and a respected and trusted corporate citizen have been critical in our ability to respond to the pandemic and that we've experienced nearly now 12 months. From an employer of choice, again, Caroline talked about employee engagement. We don't just talk about employee engagement, we practice employee engagement. And I like to think that most of our operational people out there would, if asked, what is the vision, what's important for UK Power Networks, they'll be able to outline what's important as well as I can. And that means that the vision, in my mind, is simple, easily communicated to the workforce, and importantly, easily understood. So when it comes to engagement, we run an employee survey every year, the Sunday Times Best Companies, and we rank in the top 10 best large companies to work for in the UK. So we tend to think that employees are very well engaged, and when I reflect during this period, there's no question we've tapped on the goodwill of employees, because if we remember in the early days, probably in sort of mid-April, we all got a letter from the Prime Minister saying, please, stay home. 2 days later, I had to write to our workforce, because we've got 6,000 employees, around numbers. 4,000 are required to come in every day to make sure we're able to respond to the power going off or customers' inquiries, etc. And I had to write, as a CEO, I wrote to the workforce saying, yes, we've heard the Prime Minister saying, please, stay home. But unfortunately, I need you to come in. And I often wonder if the engagement of the employees wasn't as good as it is. How many would have turned around and said, been pressured in fact from families, sorry, but I can't come in. I'm happy to say every employee that was asked to come in came in. That's, you're tapping on the goodwill of employees. And it's important that while engagement appears to be important during the good times, it's important that also that the employees return that goodwill when it's tough. And we did lots of things to continue to make sure that the employees were cared for. We provided obviously the right PPE. We provided the right with food available to them if they worked out of hours, and we communicated with them on a daily basis. We heard talking about rapid decision making within sort of even before the lockdown was announced. I think from memory, on the 23rd of March 2020, we'd arranged for a wider management team. This is about 40, 50 individuals across the organisation to meet virtually once a day, 4 p.m. every day. We invited the union reps to become part of the management team during the period, so that as we made decisions, as the environment changed, everyone was on board. We allowed teams to traditionally, they come into depots every day to make sure they get instructions of what needs to be done. We decided not to bring in teams every day, but communicate with them remotely to make sure that they avoided close contact with their colleagues. We provided, they normally travel in 2 or 3 in a vehicle. We actually provided, we hired some 300-400 additional vehicles, so employees could travel in their own vehicles to get to different jobs. And then finally, you know, the technology. If someone, and I should have said from the outset, I'm not renowned for allowing people to work from home. And if someone has said to me, so this time last year, you're going to get 4,000 of your 6,000 employees will continue to come in, but 2,000 are going to be working from home and doing a great job, I would have said you're on another planet. So to reality, within the day that we decided that the danger was imminent, we allowed people to work from home, but importantly provide the technology to either answer customer calls remotely, but also provide, I think we issued 1,000 laptops within days for people that could have laptops at work, for example, but also at home. We undertook the training necessary to make sure that they were able to do what required to be done. So when I reflect on what's happened and how we've responded, as I said, our performance, operational performance in every area, whether it's how quickly we respond to customer queries, how quick the reliability of the network, the level of customer service, it's the best performance we'd ever delivered in 2020. That says to me that our employees have passed the test of is UKPN agile, or has it adapted quickly enough to changes circumstances? And the answer to that, I'm happy to say it's a resounding yes, but that doesn't mean we can be complacent, because on a daily basis, and there's significant change happening in the electricity industry as we transition to a low carbon economy, the decarbonisation of transport, decarbonisation of heat, that will require continuous change to our industry and continuous adaptive resilience for our employees, starting from senior management all the way down to our frontline people. So while we can reflect back over the last 12 months and feel comfortable that we've delivered adequately, and that would apply for, not just for UK Power Networks, but any other organisation, the environment is continually changing, and therefore we need to continually change to adapt. And on that note, I hand you back to Simon, the chair.
Basil, thank you. Thank you, all panelists. And we've got some great questions coming in from the audience. If I may, though, I'll kick off with the first one, and probably back to you, Basil, to start with, because Christopher talked about the North Star. And you would mention sort of how important, I know you're very passionate about the combination of employer of choice and being a respected and admired organisation to other stakeholders. And yet you talked about pivoting very quickly, your own personal sort of views against working from home, but then pivoting very quickly. Does that North Star sort of, is that what guides you, that sort of feeling of what the organisation should look like? And how do you get that through to people?
Yeah, no, the short answer is yes, it does. And everything we do is guided by our vision, that the North Star, in other words, an employer of choice, a respected corporate citizen, and sustainably cost efficient. And it's taken now, I think I mentioned that the workforce, I'd like to believe that the workforce actually know what how to describe that North Star as well as I can. And it's taken 10 years of continued communication. I spent probably 2 days a week, used to spend 2 days a week actually out and about talking to the employees. We still do that now on a regular basis, but virtually. And the technology allows for that. But the first thing I ask in most meetings, okay, what's important to UK Power Networks? What is our vision? What do we get paid to deliver? And if you keep on doing that, eventually, even when I'm out and about, walking around central London, invariably I bump into our teams doing work, and invariably we talk about that. And they know it as well as I do. So the only way you can do it is to continually reinforce. And it's not just a vision written on paper or in your business plan. It needs to be communicated constantly and consistently.
And I know how passionate you are about that personally, Basil. I mean, Christopher, Caroline, how normal is that, though? And it's one thing identifying there should be a North Star. How many organisations genuinely have that to hang things from?
I think, and maybe I'll go first. I think it's, as you say, many organizations will have a purpose or a mission or some such written down. I think the thing that differentiates is as you say, Basil, sort of how much is that truly meaningful from everyone from the boardroom through to the front line, and how many organizations are able, like you described, to make that meaningful for people, to make it known to people, and to actually frame it in such a way that it can actually guide decision making every day by, whether it's the team out fixing the power lines or if it's the executive in the boardroom. I think that's quite uncommon.
Caroline?
Yeah, no, I agree 100% with what they've both said. I mean, basically, it's all about making it meaningful for the employees, and so being able to do that is key. And certainly, it's not that I was going to say it's quite rare to have that done really well. There are some really good examples of organisations that do that, but I think, like you say, having that vision and strategy is quite common, having the kind of it up there in the headlights, but actually translating that into something meaningful for employees to be able to actually latch onto, and then giving them that purpose, I think, is really that key point.
Yeah, Simon, just quickly, I mean, I've described the sort of the headline, but under that, what we have is very clear measures. For example, under employer of choice, we aim to be the safest electricity network in the UK. We aim, as I said, to be in the top 10 best large companies to work for under the sort of Sunday Times best companies scenario. We aim to be diverse and organisation, and we rank number 3 in the UK. So we have measures to support the overall vision. In respected and trusted, for example, corporate citizen, we say we want to be the most reliable with very clear measures. We want to provide the best level of service, and we rank at 92% customer satisfaction. We want to be seen to be the best in stakeholder engagement. So there are clear measures that we keep on reinforcing. They go with the headlines, if you know.
No, that really resonates, because I'm forming a vision now of North Star sort of linked to the ground with a series of real sort of operating measures. Mm-hmm. That fusion of vision and leadership, but actually translating down to the real world that employees and people experience every day is very powerful. Mm-hmm. A great question I want to raise that's come from a member of the audience saying, to what extent is lean the enemy of resilience, given the lack of redundancy necessitated by a lean approach? I mean, this is really topical, isn't it? Because financial pressures, job pressures, everything, COVID forcing gaps in inspection regimes or in, cover for things. And at the same time, we want to be agile. So, Christopher, you must have seen a few examples of that tension.
Yeah, I mean, I work extensively with companies in heavy industries, so energy and manufacturing. So this question around lean and agility, whether the two are somehow in conflict or can complement and sit side by side, is a very frequent one. But I guess cutting to the chase, so I firmly believe that lean and agility both have a very consistent and common underlying set of principles. And associated with each, there's a toolkit. So with lean, there's Kaizen, many different tools associated with lean. Likewise with agility, many different tools and team models. And I've seen organizations very successfully deploy both side by side using the right tools from the toolkit for the different activities that they have across their business. But I think the reason that you can do that is like I say, they both come from a very similar set of underlying principles around only doing activity that delivers value for the customer. So in agility, we talk about being laser focused on the customer centric. In lean, that sometimes translates into cutting out waste, but actually the true underpinning principle is we only do activity that delivers value for the customer. Another example, both lean and agility talk about discovering new and better ways of working. So in agility, we talk about iteration, continuous improvement. Likewise in lean, continuous improvement is a core concept of lean. So sometimes different language is used, but when you really dig into it, the principles and the values are the same. And so they sit really well next to each other.
Mm.
I would agree with that as well, in terms of, I think people often think that those are in tension, and I think some aspects of those strategies are in tension, but if you're looking at both of them side by side and understanding what you're trying to achieve, that's the key. And so I very much think about resilience as it's there to protect the delivery of value. Right, so it's that wrapper that's kind of looking out for the shocks and stresses that might disrupt that value being delivered. And so it's there to fulfill the same purpose. And so you've got to have both of those, because if you're just focused on cutting things away, then that might actually be counterproductive to delivering value. And so being mindful of both of those two things, I think, is really key, and working alongside.
Yeah, Simon, I mean, it's been, I'm not sure that I can explain it any better than Caroline or Christopher, but just an example. We spend a lot of resources, a lot of money on making sure that we've got safe work practices. But can you imagine if we did not have safe work practices, the outcome? Because I regard, for example, safety and compliance as a license to operate, because if either one of those falls away, the safety especially, then you end up putting all sorts of restrictions on operating plant out there, and the costs far outweigh the cost of actually recovering from a poor safety record, far outweigh the cost that you invest to get an excellent safety record in the first place. So agility, lean, and importantly, as Caroline set out, the value of the business is dependent on both of those.
So it's back to that North Star, isn't it? By all means, get efficient, but never at the expense of safety, for example.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Another great question that actually has always taxed me and interested me is the disparity when you're building resilience between large companies and SMEs. And there's a sort of counterintuitive thing, because on one level, agility is normally associated with sort of speedboats, not oil tankers, and you can move faster as a small organization. On the other hand, when you're in the speedboat looking up, you think that oil tanker's a big comfy place with lots of resources to be resilient. So Caroline, you kick us off. How do you see the advantages and disadvantages of small?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think you're absolutely right. I think that small companies tend to be more agile, but it comes back to this balance between having those kind of systems around risk mitigation and processes versus having that kind of flexibility and adaptability, and getting that balance right for your specific business and your specific size and sector and what you're trying to do. Just a quick anecdote from COVID. Actually, my husband runs a microbrewery. This is his new business in his 40s, so essentially his midlife crisis career, if you like. And so obviously that was severely affected by all the pubs closing, because primarily he serves to pubs. And so because he's pretty much there's 3 of them, so he was very agile in the sense that immediately we just switched to home deliveries for all our local customers. And so we got a website put up online, and so we turned our business round in 3 days to a totally different business model. And so that allowed us to actually continue through the crisis. And actually it's been an opportunity, because it's opened other doors and actually will increase our business base once we move forward. But equally, I would not describe it as a resilient business, because they don't have, because they're so small, they don't have all the systems in. And I keep saying, I'm going to do a systems analysis for you and look at all your where all your materials and ingredients are coming from, because hops is from over here and that's a problem, and Brexit's going to affect this. And so they don't do that, and they need to have both. So I think it's really about that balance.
I give you my address in a minute, Caroline, for deliveries.
Yeah, Brian's had a sample already. I sent Brian some.
Yeah,
he didn't share then.
I'm bemoaning the tragedy that my midlife crisis involved accountancy. Christopher, what do you see around the small and medium?
Yeah, maybe one thing to add, and you may remember I had one slide which showed this seesaw between on the one hand, this idea of stability, efficiency, effectiveness, and then on the other side, dynamism, speed, nimble. And I think it is a common misconception that you have to choose between those things, that you're either stable and efficient or you're nimble and dynamic. And we would say true agility comes from the artful combination of both of those. If you're nimble but don't have a consistent way of doing things, then you are a bit like a startup. You end up having, and you can move fast, but you end up being very inefficient, reinventing the wheel many times, not having actually the stable processes that allow companies that are larger to move very fast. And then likewise, if you're overly bureaucratic, you've got too much stability, then you can be very slow to make decisions. So you do need both. I think what we see then, the implication of that is that the journey towards agility looks very different depending on your starting point. If you're an SME, which is starting from a very entrepreneurial, almost startup-like culture, then your journey towards agility will be around building an appropriate backbone of the right signature core processes that you need to be able to get more efficient. Conversely, if you're a very large company with got all of those processes, then the journey looks quite different. It's much more about how do you become more nimble, more dynamic.
And again, Simon, I mean, utilities generally have been very stable. In some cases, probably too stable. So we start from stability, but again, arguably over the years, we've lacked the capacity to adapt or to be agile. And I think given the changing environment, and in our case, certainly London tests you in terms of the agility, because in any day things can happen in London that if you don't respond very quickly, you'll end up in the front pages of the newspaper for the wrong reasons.
You're on mute, Simon.
Oh, you're on mute.
gosh, the classic line of COVID, isn't it? You're on mute. Apologies. No, it's a follow-on point from what you were just saying, Basil, about the fact that COVID has focused our attention on resilience a lot. And yet, in some respects, COVID was utterly predictable, and it came up as, let's say, a rising tide rather than a sort of meteor strike. And is COVID actually a good test of resilience compared to the sort of meteor strike type event? Basil, how do you see that one?
Well, there's no question it's been a test. As I said in my comments, I think whenever you test the business continuities with different scenarios, I wish I could say when the issue of a pandemic, meaning everybody that can work from home, works from home, whether that was ever seen by me as a realistic scenario, I'd be lying if I said that was the case. But to reality, on the other hand, the snowy and weekend is not unusual, and a storm is not unusual, and things happening in London are not unusual. Therefore, the agility had been tested. This was a level that certainly I'd never experienced before, but it's a bit, if you touch on a sporting analogy, if you've never trained to do something, then you're unlikely you're going to succeed when the test comes. And I think agility and the pandemic that we've experienced is a good example. If you didn't when tested in different level of agility, I think we would have failed during the last 12 months. I don't think there's much doubt about that.
Yeah, and I think it has been, it's one of those events that it was just so, even though it was known, the scale of it was sort of unknown. And so nobody had prepared for the scale that we saw. And so that's where having this adaptive capacity and agility really kicked in. And so that's what obviously we've seen and Christopher's documented, particularly, with the likes of sort of Tesco, where they had to kind of double their delivery capacity within a couple of weeks. They took on 40,000 extra staff, and this was all incredible agility in order to move that tanker of an organisation to be able to do that. So I think it's great in some respects having kind of this experiment that's just happened and still happening that we could actually learn a huge amount from, and actually test these approaches and actually be able to now sort of take that information, learn and improve and better prepare ourselves for next time.
And the credibility with employees, as I said, I think it's paramount, because in any test, whether it's a wide-ranging test such as the pandemic or smaller tests, is how credible would the employees be prepared to follow what you're suggesting? Because if the answer to that is no, then you can't be that agile.
Right.
So I'm going to spend about 20 seconds summing up, rather than, because I want to come back to the three of you with a question, just to give you 20 or 30 seconds notice of it, and a one-sentence answer, please. It's a great question from Ronald Willis. COVID-19 shows natural agility to mutate as its environment changes. What's the organizational equivalent of a capacity to mutate? So you've got 20 seconds to think about that. I'm going to use that 20 seconds to thank each of the panelists, because I think it's been a great discussion. What I've taken away, I've just got this image I don't want to shake off, which is of a guiding purpose for an organization, North Star, call it what you like, set by leaders, rattling around the organization daily in every interaction, setting the tone, such that you don't need to think in each event what the organization needs to do. It becomes that trained muscle. But I'm haunted, because I know how difficult this is in practice, by that setting the vision and dragging it down to runway level to make sure that in metrics and in clear instructions and in goals, it's really embedded through the organization. So I'm taking that away as the real clear thing, and thanks to all of you. So the organizational equivalent of a capacity to mutate, Caroline.
That's adaptive capacity, of course.
Brilliant insight, short sentence. Christopher.
So I think it's the ability to sense where the opportunities are across your business and then reallocate in a meaningful way people and capital for those opportunities. True reallocation.
Basil, last word.
Yeah, Simon, I mean, the March lockdown, we banned our employees going into customers' premises. By the November lockdown, by August, in fact, or July probably was, we'd actually come up with a safe work method that enabled employees to enter customers' premises safely.
Good mutation.
Yeah.
Thank you. Listen, thanks everybody. Robert, back to you.
Well, on behalf of Resilience First, I'd like to thank everybody on the call today for a wonderful session, and particularly the chair and the speakers for their contributions. So we will be circulating a short summary in due course and sharing the slides and also the guide that McKinsey have worked with us so hard to deliver. So thank you all. And finally, just leaves me to say that please do join us for our next webinar, which will be throughout the month of March, and we'll be looking at how technology can help meet the carbon net zero challenge. So it's another challenge for you. Have a good day, and thank you very much for joining us. Bye.
Thanks. Bye. Bye.